Morning, everyone. So I thought I'd go over a few things in the King's speech that may have been a little bit of a surprise. I'm going to first of all, though, because there was comments about the number of them. So, I mean, I did a little video on my own channel yesterday where I pointed out there were 38 bills. It included 3 draft bills, but 38 bills, which compares, if you think about like previous King's speeches, like the last King's speech had like 7 or 8, something like that. I think it was 7. But when we've had changes of government in 2010, there were like 24. To 1997, there were 22. Now, different bills are of different sizes. But Katrina's just said there in like 2023, there were 57 bills passed very high. So, first of all, they weren't all government bills. Remember, it's not just the government who put legislation before Parliament. Any MP can do that. And you do usually get some bills passed that got nothing to do with the government. So in last year was pretty pathetic, but the year before there were 52 bills that the government put before Parliament, but only 42 of them went through. And some of those bills were like paragraph things. You know, there was, I'm going down them, there was literally one which does something for a minor royal. So we're not talking about the sort of bill. So basically what you've got is you've got a certain number of bills in the King's speech, or it would have been the Queen's speech a couple of years ago. In 2022, 2023, it would have been the Queen's speech. And so that's what the government's saying. This is our major legislation. And then throughout the session, they'll probably add more bills to it, which may be reactive. It's like, oh, we need to do this thing. Let's just do that. Or it just wasn't worth mentioning in the Queen's or King's speech. And then you have other MPs who are allowed to put bills before Parliament. And if MPs like it, then it goes through. It's not always just the government. So, yeah, the actual number of bills that will be passed in this session will be much higher, assuming they don't drop a load. So, yeah, how long will it take to get through, I think, is what people's general question is. I mean, that depends on Parliament. You know, the government will be preparing these bills. They won't all be written just yet because they can't just throw 38 before Parliament straight away. They'll prioritise. One of the big priorities were the rail ones. Now, I just want to sort of point out here, this newspaper behind me. So if you looked at the front pages of the newspapers, like all the Tory press are going, oh, this is horrible. We're going to be in like Stalinist Russia by next year. And then you look at some of the other papers and go, oh, this is all right. Yeah, we quite like this. And but this unintentionally was the funniest headline for me. It's from the I newspaper. It says, Avanti first rail firm at risk of nationalisation. Now, I am going to point out the actual article itself is absolutely fine. Sorry, this is doing the thing now. So we're doing this via Google Meet, which apparently is better for video, but it keeps putting my mic down. I'll just have to leave it. It's just done it again. I can't do anything about that. But it was an unintentionally funny headline because I just read it and I know what they're talking about, and I'll explain what they're talking about in a moment. But I just found it funny, at risk of nationalisation, because I thought to myself, well, let's just go back here. So 2020, Keir Starmer's made Labour lead, and he goes, oh, we should probably nationalise the railways. 2021, yeah, we should come up with a way to nationalise the railways. 2022, Labour go, right, we've got a plan. Right, what we're going to do is, as the contracts end, we're going to bring them into public hands, and that means it won't cost us a penny to do it. We don't have to pay anything to shareholders. 2023, by the end of 2022, Liz Truss Boris Johnson and Liz Truss between them, shall we say, have completely destroyed the Conservatives' reputation. Boris Johnson destroyed their reputation on public service grounds, and Liz Truss destroyed their reputation on economic competence grounds. So then, start of 2023, it's all down to Rishi Sunak, who turns out to be a political idiot, right? So throughout 2023, he does nothing but put the Conservatives in an even worse position, because instead of actually fixing anything, he just decides to break things even more. So by the end of 2023, you now know that Labour, who have now announced their plan to nationalise rail companies, not the whole railways, but there is more of that in the King's speech, are going to win the next election. So then you have 2024. We have the election. Labour win. And now I read a headline that's basically going, there's just a risk that rail companies might be nationalised. And I just pissed myself laughing. But in reality, wasn't the plan introduced by Jeremy Corbyn? Yeah, it may well have been, but he didn't do it, did he? What I'm trying to say is anyone who thinks, like, anyone will have known for some time that Labour were planning on nationalising the railways, right? And just to see a headline going, this rail company may be at risk of being nationalised, I just found unintentionally funny. But what the headline is about, now, something I mentioned. So after the election, Louise Haigh, who's the Transport Secretary now, who is, I mean, railways are very much her thing. And she surprised me by going a little bit further because, so we all knew the plan was nationalise, and I did this last week. I talked about this last week, I think, maybe. We all know that the plan was to nationalise rail companies as their contracts ended. But what Louise Haigh said is she has been getting legal advice on at what point are they breaching their contracts in terms of delivering the service, with a view to ending contracts early if they're not delivering. So then you look at the King's speech, and it's then in the King's speech. So if I go down to, I'm not putting it up here because, but if I go down to the Railways Bill, public ownership, the initial passenger railway services public ownership bill will put passengers back at the heart of rail services by enabling us to bring contracts into public ownerships as they come to an end, or if operators fail to meet their commitments. This bill will make further legislative changes to comprehensively reform our rail sector, bringing track and rail back together. So, and planning services on a whole system basis to better deliver for passengers and freight customers and unlock growth. So actually, what's in the King's speech goes further, because we just thought, oh, rail companies back into public hands, contracts expire. That's what we've had for like years. That was the plan, or 2 years, that was the plan. What this does is it goes actually a little bit further. Do we think we'll ever get an impact assessment for Brexit? See, we should. I mean, that would be my thing. So there's a lot of people like hassling Labour on various Brexit-related things. And there was a Brexit surprise in here as well, which I've done a video for my own channel, but I can go over it as well. What I would say is everything that impacts the economy, generally the Treasury will produce an economic impact report on anything the government does that has that is likely to have an economic impact. And yet we never got one for Brexit. That's what I think Labour should be hassled on. Are you going to tell the Treasury now to produce an economic impact report for Brexit? Because the Conservatives didn't want to do it because they knew it'd be really bad. My microphone's going down and down. Sorry about this, but there's no point in me trying to put it back up. It just instantly goes back down again. Just all of these sort of like video conferencing things hate me in some way or other. But yeah, so that's what the I is talking about. The actual person who wrote the article, perfectly sensible. It's just the headline writer just unintentionally made me laugh, because what they're explaining is the first rail company that gets nationalised may not be down to a contract expiring, although I think it will be. It's down to their service being really poor. But then you could look at it. I mean, what Louise Haigh would be doing here with the bill is not just, she's basically saying to rail companies who might have a bit to go, because some of these contracts go to like 2030. She's giving them a choice. She's saying, look, you reckon you know how to run a business? Well, run your business then. Run it, do it properly. Deliver the service you're supposed to deliver according to your contract. Because if you can't, like, because think about it this way, like if someone's trying to defend the companies here, they've agreed to a contract, right? So they've signed a contract. If they can't stick to the terms of that contract, that means they're rubbish at business, doesn't it? Or they're dishonest. It's one or the other, one or the other. There's a lot of rail companies who have their rail contracts coming up end of this year. Well, there's one, I think, end of this year. There's a smattering next year and some in 2026, but there are some in 2030. But there we go. But, you know, this is going to happen. But as I say, the actual blurb in the bill seems to go further. I mean, we'll see what is in the obviously they just said roughly what the bills aim to do. We haven't got the wording of the bills yet. We don't get the wording of the bills until there's until it's presented to Parliament. And even then it can change because Parliament decides, not the government, and Parliament could amend it. And the Lords may go, okay, this isn't great, we could amend this. And the government may look at it and go, oh, that's a good idea. So, you know, the way it's worded as it's presented to Parliament is not necessarily how it's worded when it receives royal assent. There's a bit of a process. But the railways bill will have to be one of the very first ones. So what's going to happen now? So we've had the King's speech yesterday. That's quite interesting. Some of the debates, I didn't watch it all, but I watched a few bits. It was quite interesting. We're going to basically now get a week worth of debates on it. So still nothing's going to happen. There's no legislation yet. Parliament is now officially in session, but they're going to talk about the King's speech. So then what will happen is after they've had about 5 days talking about it, which is fine, by the way, I'm not criticizing that. Then, because actually the discussion about it, the debates amongst MPs and peers in the House of Lords are useful because it gives a general sense about what Parliament will accept. So that can actually save time. Then we'll have about another week or a week and a bit before the summer, because the summer recess is now going to be at the end of the month. So I think what happens now, you have your King's speech debates. That goes on for a few days. Then Labour will put forward their first bills. The railways bill, I think, will have to be one of them. Ivan Ambrose, 999 Super Chat, thank you very much. The Telegraph really are shameful with their constant ridiculous lines at the moment. Nothing but contempt for the public who voted for change. Well, it's not even that, right? You can actually take the view that the public voted incorrectly. I take the view that the public have voted incorrectly on almost everything since 2010, right? You can take that view. That's fine. You can make your arguments, not a problem. The issue with the Telegraph stuff, although they're the worst offenders, but they're not the only one. A lot of the stuff they're saying is going to be proven wrong. So, you know, I mean, I'm quite liking it. I actually haven't, but I think we should probably keep the receipts on it. We should actually clip all of these Telegraph articles. Maybe I should do a scrapbook of mad Telegraph articles. And then in a few years' time going, right, you said this would be a disaster, but things got better. Like when they're going on, oh, all this net zero stuff's going to make bills go up. And it's like, okay. So in a few years' time when and it might be quite a few years, but let's say for the next election, when they're lower in real terms, are they still going to be saying that? So there's a lot of, in a way, I quite like the fact that they're going full crazy because it will help. I mean, it's very difficult to discredit the mainstream media because our voice isn't as loud as theirs, but it will help discredit them because you could go to people who look at this paper with your scrapbook, your 2024 Telegraph scrapbook, and then go, what happened here then? What happened here? They said this would happen. They were wrong. So you'd be able to go to people who read these things and say they didn't know what they were talking about. If you want, you could try and push the line that they were deliberately lying to you. But I think more people will believe an incompetence charge than a deliberate malfeasance charge. Nova saying, given that a lot of these companies are owned by EU member states, won't they take the train nationalisation as a slight? They profit from it after all. I mean, the individual companies won't like it, of course, but the EU won't. No, that'd be a mad thing. So no, not at all. The EU will be getting far more benefit from closer trading relationships with us than they lose from a bit of nationalisation. Because really, in terms of the major nationalisation, it really is just the rail. I can see a path to water companies. Energy is a very slow road. The GB energy idea is basically and this is the right way to do it. People need to realize you can't just buy out these private companies. It costs, you just pile on the debt and then you lose the next election. So the only way to do it is on the cheap, and that means doing it slowly. And it is annoying that a government can come in and privatize stuff within a few years, and yet nationalizing it could take 20, 30 years. depend. The railways wouldn't take that long, but that's the nature of the way the railway privatization was managed in the first place. If the railways were literally sold off, then this would also be difficult, wouldn't it? Because there wouldn't be contracts as such. Nick's saying they're both Barnier and the commission. I mean, remember, Barnier's sort of out of it now, but he's worth listening to because he was involved in the process, but he's not now influential. But the commission, but then the commission we're going to have a new commission as well. But anything positive from the EU was to be welcomed. Both Barnier and the commission have made it clear that while they welcome a reset in UK-EU relations, Labour's red lines, continuation of Main Johnson's red lines will limit the scope. Yeah. But at the moment, it'll be, I'm telling you now, in a year's time, we'll be talking about EU red lines, not UK red lines. Because what are Labour's red lines? Joining the EU. We can't join the EU. If we asked to join the EU would say, don't be silly, go away. And the reason for that, and this is the same reason for the next things, is, first of all, we have broken our agreements. We've broken an international treaty with the EU recently. Secondly, we have a Conservative Party that is still wedded to Brexit, and the EU would go, yeah, so after the next election, they could be back in, and then what? We just waste all our time? Yeah, we're not doing that again. So for that reason, we can't actually even say we want to join the EU. Secondly, single market. Well, there is no mechanism to join the single market other than a bespoke deal, which would take about 15 years at least to negotiate. It's actually quicker to join the EU than it is the single market at the moment. Now, as people will know, I have hopes that this plan of Macron's will come to fruition, which will then be an easier. Basically, the way we need to get back in is doing what Ukraine is doing. You know, all this Norway deal, Switzerland deal. No, none of those they're all non-starters. The Ukraine method is the way. The Ukraine, right, is a country that does want to join the EU, but it's not politically ready to. We're not politically ready. But the EU knows that it needs closer relations with the EU, with Ukraine. It needs to bring Ukraine into the fold. It needs to give Ukraine the economic benefits. So what wants to happen? Obviously, Ukraine is currently occupied, a lot of it. So, but hopefully, when that is no longer the case, what the EU's plan is, and indeed Ukraine's plan, the economic benefits via single market access before full membership, because Ukraine is not ready for the political requirements, but it is for the economic ones once it's got its own border secure. Well, that's us. We're not ready for the political commitments, but we do want the economic commitments. The customs union is an unfortunate one, but again, as soon as you say you want to join the customs union, you are basically saying you want to join the EU, because there is, I know Turkey's in a customs union, but then Turkey also wants to join the EU, but it's just not doing what it needs to, right? There is no way of arguing that we should join the customs union if you're not going to argue we should join the EU later. So as soon as you even say we should join the customs union, you're basically saying we should join the EU, right? And we know that's politically tricky at the moment. And then the only other red line is freedom of movement. But I am here to tell you, in a few years' time, I don't think people are going to see that as a red line, because we're already talking about softening that straight away at this summit today. But there we go. As we're talking about Brexit, there was an interesting Brexit line. Let me find it for you. I will just read this out. This was a surprise, by the way. I don't think the Brexiteers have noticed yet. Where is it gone? It's here it is. It's called the Product Safety and Metrology Bill. How many's read that? You haven't read it, have you? It's rubbish. But listen to this line. This bill will enable us to make the sovereign choice to mirror or diverge from updated EU rules so that we can maintain high product safety while supporting businesses and economic growth. So it's basically the reverse of Jacob Rees-Mogg's retained EU law bill, where it allowed ministers to just destroy entire laws off the statute book. What this does is it would allow ministers. So because the problem is, like, let's say we were to completely align our standards with the EU tomorrow, right? Obviously, we can't do it tomorrow, but but let's say we were to, at some point this year, completely align standards with the EU. Well, next year they're all out of alignment again. Not all of them, obviously, but over the next year, the EU will be making new rules and we will be making new rules. So we're constantly getting divergence. Divergence is just happening all the time. So what this bill, amongst other things, is going to allow the government to do is just make changes. So every time the EU changes some standards, and by change we mean raise them, that minister can go, well, actually, that's quite important. I mean, if it's a rule that's got nothing to do with if it's to do with something we don't trade, we don't import and we don't export it, we're not bothered. Well, we just leave it. But if it's something that's related to our trade and allowing that divergence harms our trade, the minister can just go, well, we'll just raise our own standards then to remain equivalent. So that's quite interesting. It just allows the government to do that. No hassle, no messing about, all very boring, the EU are changing this rule. And remember, we get notice. We don't have to do it reactively or not quickly anyway. The EU have changed this rule. Should we do the same? The minister can look at it. How, will it affect our trade? Yeah, it will. Yeah, let's change it. So basically, in the King's speech, there's a big alignment aspect to it. Ivan Ambrose, another $9.99. Thank you very much. Says, so Liz Truss has cried to Simon Case because she doesn't take responsibility for economic damage, just when you think she couldn't get more deluded, but clearer than no limits with her. So that was the other funny thing related to the King's speech. So for those who don't know, the blurb that came out about the King's speech, one of the things in the King's speech, let me get the exact wording of the bill. I've forgotten now. It's like the first bill, isn't it? The Budget Responsibility Bill. So it basically is an anti-Liz Truss bill. It's a bill that says whenever the government wants to do anything, there has to be an Office of Budgetary Responsibility report that goes with it. Any sort of fiscal statement. Because the big problem with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng is they said what they were going to do, and they said, oh, it's going to be totally great. And then everyone said, okay, so can we see someone else saying it's going to be great? And they went, no, we haven't asked anyone else. So in other words, no one checked their homework, which of course then caused nearly a run on the pound. And it's why a lot of people's pension pots are now a lot smaller than they were. So the government have introduced this Budget Responsibility Bill, which is literally an anti-Liz Truss bill. Wouldn't need to exist if it weren't for Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. So she was whining about this, the civil service going on about it. Oh, it's disgraceful. And she may have had a point, to be fair. She may have had a point. So she's written to Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, and he's gone, okay, we've changed the wording for you. I'm happy now. And now she's pointing it out. Now, here's the thing. This Budget Responsibility Bill is hardly one of the headline bills. It's the first bill in the list, but it's hardly the most exciting, is it? In fact, it's a bill that shouldn't actually do anything, because every other government since the OBR was formed has got the OBR to produce a report to go alongside their budget statements. And every government since Liz Truss has done the same, including Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt. So there's no need for this bill. It's purely performative. And again, it'll be one of those small bills that you just throw out just really quickly. It's just performative to remind people that Liz Truss was a nutter. So in a way, I can understand her taking offense at it. But at the same time, by her drawing attention to it, she's just drawn attention to why we have this bill. She's gone Barbara Streisand again, hasn't she? Anyway, catch up with a few comments, last few minutes. Let's have a look. Freedom movement's nice, but it has downsides. Awful job hunting when entry-level jobs wanted 3 or 5 years experience, a license and constant agency places, so no work benefits or job security. Well, except people are getting better job security in this country now. Freedom of movement is not really, there is no downside to freedom of movement of people or anything. I can't. The only downsides anyone ever really had with freedom of movement were down to things that were not part of freedom of movement. Like, oh, it allows foreigners to come here and do the work for less than we do. It's like, no, that wasn't freedom of movement. That was our government allowing employers to pay foreign workers a lower wage. Like, so the way the law was, and actually the Conservatives since Brexit have made this worse. So the way the law was, it was like, if you advertise for a job and you can't get any applicants, you are allowed to put the job out again for a lower than the going, and you're allowed to hire people. It didn't even have to be from the EU. It could have been from anywhere in the world, but anyone from the world would have to get a visa. So you were more likely to get an EU applicant. You could get an EU applicant for the job and you would be allowed to pay them below the going rate. So that was like your undercutting. So employers would sort of, maybe dodgy ones would pretend they couldn't get someone in from abroad who was from a country where lower than UK standard wages would still be good for them. That was your issue. But that was a UK law. That wasn't an EU law. Other EU countries don't do that. We did that. And then since Brexit, we've made it worse. So the Conservatives have actually legislated to allow you to massively reduce the wages the wages you have to pay to someone who comes from abroad to do the work. I mean, it's absolute madness. So actually, that problem Brexit made worse. Another thing that Brexiteers will make worse for themselves is, of course, their support for Donald Trump, the orange one. Because, of course, if Trump wins, and I'm going to say, do you know what my next political bet is? Graham will be shouting at me, but I can't hear him because my headphones will have turned off now. My next I've put a bet on Joe Biden to win the presidency, right? I will get an absolute fortune if he does. Absolute fortune. But then the reason I'll get a fortune is because no one thinks it's likely. But I think people are going a bit mental on this. So Uncle Phil defends Liz Truss. We weren't expecting that. No, I'll just say, obviously, if someone has a pop at you, you take offence, don't you? The fact that she deserves to have a pop taken at her, I don't think is a defence. But inevitably, you are going to take exception if someone wants to ridicule you. Like, Labour have literally got the king to take the piss out of Liz Truss. I think it's not madness to feel aggrieved. What was madness was drawing attention to it. She should have just kept quiet. But there we go. That's what she is. Say Joe Biden's not even going to run. Well, you say that, and that may be true. And actually, I don't mind losing my bet if that is the case. However, do bear in, and there are ways around this. Bear in mind, there's only 4 months left. Only Joe Biden can take credit for Joe Biden's record. And the Democrats have already raised shitloads of campaign funds for the Biden-Harris ticket. Now, if you change that ticket, what happens to those donations? Right? So I think actually, I mean, I don't know, but we will see. I don't mind if they do change them as long as it's for someone sensible. Newsom, maybe. But that's fine. How do I think Farage will argue against that political alignment bill? If he's even there, do you mean? Do you think he'll even be in Parliament to argue against it? Do you know what? It'll be funny. I did say, when they won those MPs, it'll actually be hilarious, him standing up and arguing against all the things he doesn't like. But he won't be there for that many of them. He won't be there for that many of them. But there we go. EU freedom movement isn't the same as open borders. Someone needs to provide that distinction. Absolutely. What we have now have been open borders because we've, since Brexit, not been controlling them. What we had before was controlled borders. People do need to make that distinction, but the media don't and the Conservatives don't. And let's be honest, Labour are pretty bad at making arguments. So there's no point saying, well, Labour should make the argument. They've demonstrated for 15 years, more than 15 years now, they're really bad at arguments. In 2010 general election, Labour had actually basically got us through the financial crisis. They were earning, there were people around the world, including at the IMF, when Labour said, Alistair Darling and Gordon Brown said, we're going to do this, 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 and this. And they said, we're not sure about that. Like 2 years later, they're going, oh, that was actually a really good idea. And there were other countries around the world doing the same thing. So Labour actually dealt very well with the financial crash. And they lost the election. That's how bad they were at arguments. And they didn't get any better with Ed Miliband onwards. So actually, Labour are really bad. Say Joe's only 1 to 6 odds at Ladbrokes. I got better odds than that. I got 12 to 1. I'm going to have a massive payout. Actually, it was a little bit less than that. It was 11 something to 1. But I will be having a massive, massive stake if he wins. Although if he does win, I am just going to point out, just to go along the old Herald of Doom theme, America's still screwed, you know. If Biden wins, they're still screwed, because think about what's going to happen. First of all, there'll be an attempt to actually steal the vote. So if Joe Biden wins, remember, there's a massive weakness in American politics. Can we be sure that Republican states won't try and get Trump made president anyway? And if that is headed off, well, the Supreme Court have just said that prosecutors made a fuss about the people who stormed the Capitol and literally tried to murder the vice president. So, yeah, I think there might be some violence. What do you think? And the Supreme Court is still basically fundamentally unfit for purpose. You cannot have a constitutional court that acts as a check against the power that appoints it. You know, we have an independent judiciary in this country. The Conservatives threatened that, but they're gone now. But we had an independent judiciary. We have an independent judiciary in this country. And that is a check against the government. America don't, and they need one. And there's no sign that anyone's got the political will to make it happen. So America's still buggered. Yeah, it's still knackered. Don't worry about it. It's just that if they elect Trump, it's finished. It's over. Bye-bye. Forget it. And from the Brexiteers' point of view, they'll be cheering until someone points out to them, we've lost America as an ally, so now we're going to have to run faster to the EU. Like, Europe is going to be the bastion of like Western civilization. So they will still have Canada and people like that, you know. But once America's gone, Europe has to stand up, and we have to be part of that. So the Brexiteers, it will be like, hey, Trump won. How do you like that, Remainers? And we'll be going, yeah, we don't like it, but it does at least mean we're going to move quicker to the EU. How about that? But anyway, we've gone well over time again. I'll just do this last one. I still don't understand why Labour is so bad at getting really good policies out there. Okay, there's a far-right media, but surely in the age of social media, they could employ some smart operators. Let me just make a final comment on that. So I was looking at Labour's YouTube channel yesterday again. I do that whenever I want to feel miserable. You know, whenever I'm too happy and I'm feeling too good about things, I go to the Labour Party YouTube channel to bring me down. Let me just show you what's on the Labour Party YouTube channel. They did a video. This was 2 weeks ago, just before the election. They did a video with Elton John. It's got 2 weeks later, it's got 16,000 views. How on earth do you do a video with Elton John and only get 16,000 pissing views? It's embarrassing. And then Labour 5 days ago produced a video saying, oh, we've done all this. This is our actions, right? 46,000 views. Now that's about average for one of my videos, right? Except I've done several videos on the same theme in terms of what Labour's done. My best one has got 223,000 views. So this is what I mean when we talk about social media, but we talk about anything. Labour are really bad at messaging. They're stunningly bad at it. But they're in power now. So change the system and maybe hope they get someone in that's a bit better at some point in the future. But they will have to leave it there. Can we get a link for the Elton John video, please? Why would you want it? Like, no one else wanted to watch it. Why would you? But I'll link it if you like. But there we go. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel, of course. And have a great day. It's going to be a hot one today if you're around, well, where I am anyway. It's been very hot. I've seen like various people I know who live on the continent who've been going about how hot it is. But it is going to be hot. But enjoy it anyway if you can. Don't forget sunscreen if you go out. Don't be giving yourself skin cancer. Have a great day. And until next time, I'll see you later.